I don't know how to say her name, but hello. To me, it reminds me of the removal of Marquez Perez Jimenez, except U.S. forces doing the job. It's very sketchy knowing U.S. history and war, but most Venezuelans like me wanted this. After Perez Jimenez, the remaining governments made a pact called El Pacto del Punto Fijo. So oil is not private but public, used for people to repair the country with the money it makes. Venezuela became the richest South American country from the 60s to the late 80s. I get reaching for the, Jimenez comparison, but it kind of breaks at the point of kidnapping and why it's probably dangerous to treat the two as similar because Perez Jimenez was removed by Venezuelans through like civil unrest and domestic rupture that Venezuelan political forces were in control of at the time. And whatever U.S. influence existed at the margins, Washington did not abduct the head of state, claim arrest jurisdiction over Venezuela, or openly override Venezuelan sovereignty. That distinction matters more here than anything else because, right, like what followed, with the Pacto de Punto Fijo, that elite pact negotiated inside Venezuela by Venezuelans for Venezuelans. Oil remained public because Venezuelan institutions retained leverage and the prosperity gained and that followed, like you're talking about in the 60s and 80s, came from the internal political settlement, not from foreign enforcement. What's being discussed now here is the opposite of that. If a foreign power removes your head of state, that power owns the leverage from there on out, not symbolically, materially. History is very clear on this fact. And when removal is external, reconstruction is not negotiated by the population that wants change, right? It's negotiated by the power that carried out this type of act. And that power, its priorities are never social repair, long-term sovereignty or independence or public wealth for the population. Those acts are based on access and control. And to just, even like I doubt that most Venezuelans wanted this. I don't buy that. It might be emotionally true for some people, but the consequences are going to be dire and it's not going to change the structure. It's going to just make things worse. And desperation doesn't convert foreign coercion into self-determination. It makes it easier for outside actors to claim legitimacy over these types of things after the fact. And Perez Jimenez was like an internal Venezuelan reset. This is an external Venezuelan override, and these are not the same things, right? Like history does not confuse these things. And the tragedy here is that conditions have become so bad that external force feels like relief to some people. But that is exactly the condition under which sovereignty is lost because it's pushed there. And acts like this make it ensure that it will never be restored. Because once a foreign power proves that it can remove your leadership in such an act, it will never give that leverage back. You can't get this genie back in that bottle. And that's not anti-Venezuelan to say. It's the lesson of Venezuelan and the world's history. Because obviously wanting change is not wrong, but outsourcing it to Western Empire obviously always is, because the consequences here and what this is going to mean going forward is going to be it's going to open a Pandora's box of just precedent that will never just this unleashes something so bad. And the precedent set here is just going to the imperial boomerang is going to be almost instant, and conditions are going to get so much worse, because if they were bad before, there's no way that this is not going to be understood as a legitimate way for a leader to be removed from power. So the people in power aren't just going to say, hey, we need to legitimize ourselves, we need to have an election, because that would just pretty much do exactly what they were hoping for based on this act. In all of this said, someone who is Venezuelan would obviously have more direct experience and very real feelings that I would never even be able to imagine associated to this. So I'm a completely, like, I'll admit to be a complete outsider, but still, even outside of the Venezuela issue, this sets a precedent that cannot be, like, it cannot be, you can, I can only just describe it as, you cannot put this genie back in this bottle. The Pandora's box can of worms that is opened here, and like I've said before, it's similar to when they killed Soleimani, which again 6 years ago today. Like, the precedent that is set there set the precedent for so many things after that that would not have been able to occur had that not have happened. Yeah, I mean, again, for one, there was obviously so much outside interference in that fucking election, and Maduro still managed to hold on. And to say that, like, corrupt elections is a grounds for overthrowing a fucking regime in this type of insane way is just, again, the precedent that sets is crazy, because, like, how many times have even one side of the political aisle claimed that the other in the past 8 years in the United States have done, mass election fraud? So, right, like, how does anybody, like, how do you justify a straight up fucking invasion based on illegitimate elections? But I'm not denying what you're saying about corruption and the repression against the protests and the fucking, like, weaponized hunger and things like that, because I know all about that shit. But at the end of the day, it's gonna get worse because of this. And I've said this numerous times when it came to people, like when it came to the previous other times in the past decade or so, in the past like 8 years, where Venezuela has been threatened by outside forces in fucking coup attempts, etc., etc. This is the reason why I never thought that it would amount to this, is because of the consequence. Now we're going to see the consequence. Yeah.